When I was younger, each summer and almost every new year my family would pack the car and go on a road trip to visit family in Mexico. We never had any problems until one particular trip when I was 8. Like every road trip before, we left our home in North Texas around 6 p.m. in order to reach our destination the next morning. So around 2 a.m., we crossed into Mexico. And that's when things got weird. When you're on the only stretch of freeway in the middle of the desert, you don't tend to freak out about having the same car behind you for miles. It was practically pitch black outside our car windows, the only visible shapes being the dotted stars and the eerie silhouettes of the cacti. We'd been in Mexico for about an hour and still had few more to drive. And I remember sleeping but still being semi-conscious of what was around me because I didn't have the skill to really fall asleep in a car. So, when my mother suddenly spoke my dad's name, I heard her. "Miguel, that car behind us. It's been behind us since we left Laredo." My dad peeked at the car, shrugged off my mother's tension. A lot of cars use this road. He's probably going to Reynosa or another city. And he left it at that. Despite his sureness, my mum kept a wary eye on the car behind us. By this time, my siblings and I were hyper-aware of the car and entertained ourselves with watching the car through the gaps in the luggage that blocked the rear window. We got tired pretty quick. "He's getting closer," my mother noted, and we turned to watch as the car inched closer and closer to ours. "He's too close, Miguel." And she was right. By this time, the car was practically pressed against the rear of our car, and on a lonely stretch of highway in the middle of nowhere with another few hours until daylight, it was downright scary. We couldn't do much. My dad didn't slow down, didn't stop, and he didn't speed away either, he just drove. And the car followed. The next 30 minutes were the most tense we had ever experienced. The car would ease off sometimes only to press its blinding headlights against our rear once more, like he knew he was freaking us out and enjoying it. It was during one of the periods that the car had pulled away that my mum spotted a police car up ahead parked on the side of the road, and she didn't miss a beat. "Pull over, right in front of the police. Pull over right now, Miguel." And he did. And the car kept driving. I wonder how confused the policeman must have been as he watched my dad park our car right in front of him. The policeman came over and asked what was wrong, and my mother urgently told him everything. The car, the way it followed us and taunted us. The policeman took her claims seriously and told us of how people were victimized and had their cars stolen on these empty highways by thugs and criminals. And then he offered to drive behind us for a while to make us feel safe. We drove off with the police cruiser behind us. Relieved, until about 10 minutes later when we saw something that confirmed the policeman's words and my mother's worst fears. 10 minutes later, we saw the car pulled over on the side of the road, waiting. One night 3 years ago, I got into a fight with my girlfriend at the time. In my rage, I stormed out of her house, got in my truck and just drove. I hopped on the interstate and drove. About an hour later, I was in Nashville, but I was still pissed, so I decided to keep driving. I made it my goal to reach Kentucky and turn around. I had never been to Kentucky before, and it seemed like a good idea at the time. I reached Kentucky about 2:30 in the morning, having left my town a little after 12:30. I grabbed a Coke and a biscuit from the first McDonald's and headed back to Alabama. As I'm heading back, I realize I'm running low on gas right as I get to Nashville. So I pull off Interstate 65, go down the off-ramp and hit a light. I make a left and hit another light. Now here's where it gets weird. As I pull up to this light, I notice something strange. The only car on the road is stopped at the green light to the right. Weird, I thought, but hey, it's after 3 at this point. The person could be tired. Once I reach the red light, however, the car rolls forward through the light and under the overpass for the interstate. Then I see their brakes light up and their headlights go out. They stopped under the overpass, and my heart starts to race. I was sitting in the turn lane waiting for the light. The gas station was right past the overpass, and there they were, waiting for me. I was freaking out. I watched my light turn green, then back to red. I was waiting to see if they would move, but they didn't. Finally, when the light switched to green again, I flicked on my high beams and crept through the intersection, trying to make out their faces, but I couldn't. Then lo and behold, as soon as I passed them, their headlights turned on and they started moving again. At this point, I'm scared shitless, staring at the headlights in my rear view instead of the road, as I make it the couple 100 feet to the gas station. Thankfully, when I pull in the gas station, the first thing I notice is the cop car parked out front. So I park at the pump, and as I'm getting out, I watch the car pull in the station and park. I start pumping, and as I'm doing so, I watch a man exit the vehicle and start to walk inside. The whole time, from the second his head pops out the car to when he makes it inside the store, he is staring at me, smiling like that shell-shocked soldier, shaking his head left to right. He walks into the store and gets in line right behind the cop. Now maybe I've watched too many movies, but the whole time he was standing there, I thought he was going to kill that cop. Thankfully, he did not. Once I had enough gas to get home, I stopped pumping, jumped in my car, and double-checked my phone for directions back to the interstate. As I was leaving the gas station, though, I noticed the man leave his place in line and run out of the store. That's when I panicked. I hit the gas, ran the red light at the overpass, ran another red light and got back on the interstate. I then went about 85 to 90 miles per hour the whole way home, constantly checking my rear view. Still one of the creepiest things to happen to me. And it reiterated to me what the detective told all the incoming freshmen at orientation: nothing good happens after 2 a.m. I was driving alone from eastern Colorado to Wyoming in the middle of the night on a dirt road. It was the type of darkness that most people never get to experience, like being in the middle of the ocean, no cities or even small towns for hundreds of miles in every direction. Once I hit the border of Wyoming, the road became pavement. After about half an hour, I hear this loud bang and my car pulls hard to the middle of the road. I got a flat tire, I pull over and get out, and it's just quiet as can be. So dark, not a single light of any kind for hundreds of miles except my dome and headlights. I start changing the tire by myself, feeling really uneasy about being alone in the middle of nowhere. So I get the tools and the spare out of the trunk and start changing the flat as fast as I can. For some reason, I'm trying to be quiet because it feels like every little sound I make is incredibly loud. I even turned my music off. I'm crouched down, finishing up, tightening the lug nuts on the spare, when I hear from right behind me, "Need any help with that?" in a man's voice. I spin around and no one is there. I look across the street in the other lane and no one is there. I grab the tire iron and start yelling, "Who's there? Who's out there?" Dead silence. I mean, I could hear my heart beating. I could barely see the other side of the road because of the darkness, but I knew that there was nothing anywhere around me but dirt and sagebrush. I spin those lug nuts on, crank them tight, spin the jack down. The whole time I have that feeling someone is right behind me. I throw all the tools in the trunk with the flat and could not jump back in my car fast enough. I felt like someone was going to stop me from closing the door when I slammed it shut. I sped home to Wyoming, freaked the hell out the whole time, checking my back seat over and over again. 4 years ago, I'm driving across the Colorado-New Mexico border at around 4 a.m., and I'm looking for a place to stop for fuel. I happened along the smallest and saddest little farm town with only one tiny gas station. I hadn't seen another car for hours, it's freezing cold, and it felt like this town was abandoned. It was that quiet. Honestly, it was kind of cool, except for the cold. I'm pumping away, feeling like I'm completely alone, until I notice another car in the shadows near the back of the building. Flashy black low rider with completely tinted windows, 4 right out of a Mexican gangster movie, looking guys leaning against it. I remember laughing because for one, they startled the hell out of me, and 2, they were wearing the black shorts, wife-beater tank tops and the knee-high socks. Remember, it was freezing cold. It was the middle of nowhere, and they looked so casual. Without a word, all four got off the car and walked straight towards me until I could see the full sleeves and face tattoos under the pump lights. Dropped the gas pump, fired up the motor, and did the greatest 0 to 100 that old girl had ever seen. Not 20 seconds after burning out onto the highway, I see headlights swerve out and follow me. Little did they know, my beat-up-looking Dodge truck had the Hemi motor and a couple of upgrades. They never had a chance, and after a few miles their headlights disappeared in my rear-view mirror. I didn't think much of it, and even laughed at how bad I outran them till a cop buddy told me about the Mexican cartels running drugs through there to avoid the interstate. I wasn't laughing anymore. This was back when I worked as a manager at a certain chicken chain of restaurants around 2016. We had to stay later than normal, cleaning flour and water stuck to the floor. I had a co-worker who was kind enough to stay a little later to help close in exchange for a ride home, which I gladly agreed to. We finish up and he's giving me directions on where to go, and I end up driving in a part of town I didn't recognize. A whole lot of farmland and open fields that felt scarily empty. It must have been around 1:30 a.m. by the time I dropped him off. I start taking the empty rural road back, feeling a bit sketched out. As I get close to approaching where the traffic lights are, that's when I notice them. There was a group of around 15 or so people fist-fighting on the road. They looked like the stereotypical description of a Latino gang member. Long white shirts, dickies, mustaches, bald heads, you know the look. The thing is, they all looked identical. It felt like I was watching clones fight amongst themselves to decide who was the real Hector. As I get closer to them, they all stopped fist-fighting and turned to look at me, almost in sync. I was about 25-ish feet away from them, slowly inching forwards because I'm obviously not going to run people over. They all looked like deer caught in the headlights, and then they all started running towards me. It was as if they were all racing each other to see who could get to me first. I panicked immediately and swerved off the road and drove around them. I looked in my rearview mirror and saw that they quickly gave up on the idea of catching up to me. I made it out without injury or damage to my car, but from that point I never offered rides to anyone from work. I live in Arizona. I don't drive all too often in the first place because I don't have to go very far to go to the store or a restaurant. It's all within biking or walking distance. However, I do have to drive to Phoenix, since it's about an hour and a half away from where I live. Now, I'm not from America, I'm from Europe, specifically Ireland and Germany. Every Christmas, I'd take a flight to Germany to spend the holidays with my father and Hitler reincarnate mother. On the drive down the mountain to Prescott, I came to one of the many turns. I just happened to glance to the desert below, and I swear I saw a tall, lanky figure with 4 heads and glowing red eyes. From what little I saw, I'd say it was maybe 9 or 10 feet tall with arms about half that. Now, I keep track of local mythology and legends pretty closely, but I've never heard of anything like that in local Sonoran, Yavapai, Navajo, or Pueblo cultures. I told my father he's like me when it comes to the supernatural, and he didn't have any clue either. It takes a lot to scare this Irish woman, but that frightened me to my very core. My friend lives in a very rural area, in the bottom of a valley. There's a group of 4 houses. His is one of them. Other than that, there is no one for miles around. To get to his house, you come down a single-lane road through a very steep gorge. At the bottom of this gorge, there's a bridge over a small river and a patch of very dense, very old woodland. On the edge of the woodland is a wooden cabin. This is the only building in this area, as the houses are another few miles down the road. When I asked my friend what the cabin was, he said that no one knows who owns it, but about once a month the road will be lined with parked cars around the cabin, and no one knows who they are or what they do in the cabin. Anyway, one night I was driving to see my friend. I have an old 90s convertible, and I had the roof down. as it was a warm night. As I go down this gorge, there's a super thick, very low-lying fog. This isn't unusual for this area. I suspect it's to do with the river in the valley. As I pass the woodland, there are cars lining the road. I'd never seen this many cars here. As I said, this cabin is in the middle of nowhere, so there's no other reason to be out there, especially at night. As I pass the cabin, I see the blinds have been closed, but that there is a single candle in one of the windows. I had to slow down a bit to get through all the parked cars, when suddenly I heard an awful screaming coming from behind the cabin, in the woodland. Needless to say, I floored it, arriving at my friend's house a few minutes later. In retrospect, it was probably just a fox. For anyone who doesn't know what a fox sounds like, imagine the most terrifying scream you possibly can, then make it worse. And that's what foxes sound like. But the sound, combined with the candle and weird numbers of cars, and the thick fog at night. I was not hanging around to find out if it was a fox. I still have no idea what goes on in that cabin. It may be something as innocent as an art club. My friend remains convinced it is a cult, and his dad thinks it's a load of swingers. We may never know.